This morning's readings come from the 11th chapter of Mark, verses 12 through 25, and saying 48 of the Gospel according to Thomas. From the Gospel of Mark. The next day, when they were leaving Bethany, Jesus felt hungry. Observing a fig tree covered with foliage some distance off, he went over to see if the tree contained any fruit. But upon inspecting it, found only leaves. It was not the season for figs. Jesus addressed the fig tree and said, "No one will ever eat fruit from you again." And the disciples witnessed this. Then they went on to Jerusalem. Jesus entered the temple and began driving out those engaged in selling and buying. He overturned the money changers' tables and the stalls of those selling doves. Moreover, he would not permit anyone to carry goods through the temple area. Then he began to teach them, "Doesn't Scripture say, 'My house shall be called a house of prayer for all peoples'? But you've turned it into a den of thieves." The chief priests and the religious scholars heard about this and began looking for a way to destroy him. At the same time, they were fearful because the whole crowd was under the spell of his teaching. When evening came, Jesus and the disciples went out of the city. Early next morning, as they were walking along, they saw the fig tree withered to its roots. Peter remembered and said, "Rabbi, look, the fig tree you cursed is withered up." In reply, Jesus said, "Put your trust in God. The truth is, if any of you say to this mountain, 'Get up and throw yourself into the sea,' and you don't doubt in your heart, but believe that what you say will happen, it will happen. That's why I tell you that whatever you ask for in prayer, and believe that you have already received it, and it will be done for you. And when you stand praying, forgive anyone against whom you have any grievance, so that your loving God in heaven may in turn forgive you your faults." Gospel of Thomas, saying 48. Jesus said, "If two make peace with each other in this one house, they'll say to the mountain, 'Move away,' and it will move away." Ancient words from all our traditions for our present day understanding.
I began this series on the Gospel of Thomas because so many people I know are compassionate, and our current political situation is so bruising in the heart. I've been trying to turn to this mystical gospel, the Gospel of Thomas, in comparison with the traditional Gospels as a way of making the link between mysticism and justice. That when we just go out and try to fight the evil that we see around us, it's very easy to become discouraged and bitter. When we find a deep place within ourselves, the compassion overflows, and that is the source out of which the justice work comes. Some of you will never want to do anything political overtly, but everything we do is political. So every conversation, every purchase, don't ever think those aren't important. I mean, we don't know where a kind word ends. And I think what's being talked about is not just what we think of as politics, but also how we treat each other and having a view of human solidarity. I think that's what's being talked about today. At the literal level, this isn't a very helpful text. When I was a kid, we had a cartoon movie that had a character, Jiminy Cricket. And Jiminy Cricket taught me, when you wish upon a star, doesn't matter who you are, anything your heart desires will come your way. Little cricket. And I believed the insect. I don't know what was wrong with me, but the text at the literal level seems to be saying that. If your faith is strong enough, you can literally make a mountain jump into the sea. Now, if you count the people who've been able to do that, You may realize we need to think symbolically here. There's an ex-musician named magician named the Amazing Randy. And what he did was he put up, I think it's like $1 million is the final amount, for anybody that could show paranormal abilities. All somebody had to do is do something that violated the laws of nature, and they got $1 million. So far, he's still got the check. I don't believe that the Christian story originally was about this kind of supernatural magic. At least I haven't been able to pull it off. If you have, hey, the job's yours. Come on up here. So what does it mean? What is it teaching us? Well, one thing I think is very, very important, and this is where you don't have to agree with me. Well, you don't have to agree with anything I say, but this is one place where it might be in your self-interest to. And that is, I don't think the church that Jesus had in mind and the church that has survived through tradition looks a lot alike. I remember hearing the thing, the church is not a sanctuary for saints, it's a hospital for sinners. Obviously, it's not a place for perfect people. And it is a place for healing, but it's not a hospital. That's the definition of a hospital. It's not the definition of a church. And the place you can come and pray and feel close to God and Jesus, that's a chapel. And both of those are things that a healthy church does. It does that. But as I understand the teachings of Jesus and stories like this, the purpose was to save the world. The purpose of the church was to save the world, not from hell, but from hatred. Not from a devil, but from injustice and hopelessness. And it came from a mystical understanding that he had. It wasn't strident, partisan. But in this story, it's going to look really partisan. I mean, my mom always said, respect all religion, respect everybody political. As soon as the Republican Party started attacking gay people, that wasn't possible for me. As soon as it started attacking women and their personal reproductive choices, that there was no neutral ground. When it put children in cages, I think Jesus would call us to stand for everybody, which sometimes means standing against some people. Not as human beings, but against the bullying that is taking place. And to not play nice with it, even if it makes it unpleasant and uncomfortable for a while. The church, the word for church in Greek, ekklesia, means to call out. I believe that Jesus was calling us out of the system of oppression. And I believe the story will make a whole lot more sense if we understand that. He is not criticizing Judaism. He's calling people back to the roots of Judaism. The same Judaism of Isaiah, Jeremiah, that also criticized religion and politics. So, what Jesus did was teach in parables, as you see this. I believe that the Christian scriptures are all parables. Some of it probably happened, but you can't know which parts. Right? You don't know which parts are spiritual teaching and which parts actually happened. So I think the safe bet is to say it's all parables. And it's all about stuff that happens to all of us. That as Jesus is speaking, he's speaking as a universal human being. So in the story, when he's hungry and his nation has no place for him and doesn't feed him, the fig tree is a symbol of the nation. Not of Judaism, but of the nation at the time. And I think we only understand it if we think of our nation and our time. Do we let the hungry go unfed? Do we let the sick go without medical care. And I think then we update the parable so that we understand why Jesus is so terribly upset. The parables, the word parable means to throw one thing alongside of another. So what Jesus, I believe, is trying to do, and again, disagree with me if you want, is that Jesus is using little folk kind of stories, images, examples, to talk about the dynamics of what it means to live a life of love that does justice. He's telling folky tales to talk about how God can, in this symbol system, the sacred God can intervene in history and give hope to people who right now don't have hope. So he's going to tell the story. Jesus is hungry. He's going to his death, ultimately. I mean, these are the last weeks of his life. And so teaching becomes very urgent. He's hungry, I think representing all of humankind. And the religion and the culture of his time, and remember, he's Jewish. Isaiah and Jeremiah is Jewish, so this is not a criticism of Judaism. But it is a criticism of fundamentalism and nationalism that have caved in on themselves. One way to unpack this is to turn to the gospel, which you can't do because you don't have it before you, but the Gospel of Thomas, which I'm doing one verse at a time. Jesus said, if two make peace with each other in this way, they will say to the mountain, move away, and it will move away. This story occurs twice in the Christian scriptures, and they're different. The gospel writers told the story differently. In one story, the tree withers right away, and the other, it doesn't wither right away, and they come by later and see that it is withered. The story wouldn't include the detail that it wasn't the season for figs if they wanted you to just believe in a miracle. Like you would leave, if you were an editor, a good editor would leave that line out because it makes it stupid. Right? If you're going to teach, say, forgive everybody, how about starting with the fig tree? Right? Forgive the fig tree if you're going to teach me about forgiveness. But that's not the point. The point is what happens to a nation when it loses compassion and dies from within. It can be the strongest nation on the planet. If this sounds familiar, let me know. But spoiler alert, a nation will die when it loses compassion for the people and its roots into the soil. So it's a warning, but it's also a hope, because it's saying if you make peace with each other, you will find a bond that will last through the crisis and trauma. And it will be a miraculous power that over time will move mountains. I mean, it doesn't tell you it's probably a pebble at a time, but you're better off not knowing that right away. But it's not just you, right? This is a movement. The kingdom that Jesus is talking about is a dynamic that sweeps through history. And you're not being asked to have this real strong faith. He's asking you to have the faith of a mustard seed. Just open yourself to the dynamic in the place and time you are. The weight of the world is not on your back. But when you open your heart in this way, there'll be something you can do to change the world where you are. And that can include, I've learned stuff from people dying in retirement homes that changed my life. And I don't know if they knew that or not. But there's never a place where you can't plant a mustard seed, is what Jesus is saying. Faith, then, is a kind of human solidarity, a faithfulness that includes our bond to people. This is not a one-on-one relationship with Jesus. That's not what Jesus is talking about. This is a social movement. And it's bigger than Christianity. A lot of people didn't have to leave Judaism to get it. And it's something that even if religion makes you sick to your stomach, it still can be something very important in your life. But he's going to talk about forgiveness. And what that means is, the word literally means to cut off, just drop something, let it go. And I think what it's saying is, I've known so many social justice warriors who didn't like people that much. You know, they're fighting for justice, but people kind of made them, they didn't, irritable. And I think when we put the pieces of these verses together, what it's saying is, you can't change the world if you don't respect the people in it. You can't change the world if you don't like and respect the people in it. This is about a movement of the people. It's so easy to get frustrated when you're struggling for justice and think, I'm the only one who cares. If people reject my ministry, then they're rejecting a whole issue. If you don't do what I tell you to do, you don't care. It's easy to fall into that. And what I think the verse is saying is, yes, go into the struggle for compassion and for a better world. But don't ever dehumanize the people who say no. Something is still happening at that level. It's so hard these days. I know that you probably saw that the president is going to skip the climate conference, and it's going to go to the religious freedom conference instead. But you know how persecuted we Christians are in the United States. We've never had a president. We've never had anybody in the Senate. I'm wrong. Everybody. It's like the most ridiculous thing there is. But that's not done out of stupidity. This is what a demagogue does. They go to the place that will upset you so much, you will forget your own compassion. You'll get so frustrated and want to fight against the brutality that you see that you'll lose your own pole star. And so there has to be the art of letting go. Forgiving does not mean putting up with abuse. It doesn't mean even resolving all the emotional issues. It just means don't carry the pain with you. There's an old saying that a demagogue doesn't mind if you hate them. They just don't want you to love each other. Right? So as long as you're focused, you love or you hate that one person, and you organize your world around that one person, you're for or against, they've got you. They've got your heart, they've got your mind, they've got your soul. So we let that go. And we keep our eyes on the prize. We keep our eyes on the positive good that we're struggling for. Jesus would have forgiven the fig tree if that was the point of the story. Right? The fig tree didn't have figs. It was a symbol of the culture, a nationalist symbol. This would be like if Jesus knocked over the Statue of Liberty, saying, you don't deserve this. You know, if you're putting refugees in freaking cages, then you need to give the Statue of Liberty back to France. That's simple, right? It's mathematics. But that insight can eat you alive if you turn it into a grudge, into bitterness, into hatred. Somebody once said a grudge is like drinking rat poisoning, somehow thinking the rat's the one that's going to die. The person that is pushing your buttons isn't losing any sleep over that. Right? You're the one staying up in the middle of the night fuming. So Jesus is saying, cut that off, let it go. Something incredibly important can be happening through your life, but it has to come from compassion and love and from the mysterious ground of your very being. The missing piece is forgiveness. Again, because you can't save the world if you don't honor and respect the people that are in it. If you get so much into social justice cause that people irritate you, time for vacation, right? Time to breathe, time to meditate, time to do something where you find your center again. What is the point of studying wisdom if you lose that wisdom every time you meet somebody who's foolish? Right? That's not wisdom, is it? What is the point of having inner peace if every time somebody's cruel, you lose your inner peace? How do you lead the world into a new direction when you're trapped in the past with a grudge or something that somebody did to you? You have a right to do that, but is that what you want? Do you really want to hold on to that pain? Confucius once said, being wronged wouldn't be so bad if we didn't remember it. Which I think is an overstatement. There's some wounds that we have that we can't let go. We need to process them. There's some abuse that needs to heal, and we need to honor that, even if it takes a lot of time. But at some point, we can injure ourselves worse than the person that hurt us. It's like an NFL game where you're doing replay all the time and looking at it from different angles. And your brain enhances that person's face and that smirk on their face and the tone of voice. And we fill our blood with this poison, this caustic poison. So Jesus is going to knock over the tables in this story. He's going to wither a fig tree, symbolically. But he's teaching even the people that he's chastising that they're bigger than that they are a part of a new family of humankind. The problem with the money changers was that they were segregating different people. Women would sit here, the men would sit here. Religion does that if it's left to its own devices. So what a prophet does, a Jesus or an Isaiah or a Buddha, what they all do is call us deeper into our own humanity so that there's room for everybody. And that's when Jesus talks about the kingdom of God, the kingdom of God. He's talking about that dynamic. And he does it in riddles and poems that we call parables because it's hard for us to get there. If you looked in the back of your yard and there was a giant iron toadstool that was growing, bulletproof toadstool, even if you couldn't fight it and overcome it, you could stop giving it water. Right? And that's what is being talked about here. You can't take away the fact that you've been wounded, and you shouldn't. But are you nourishing your happiness or your bitterness? Which gets more of the perks? I think holding a grudge is sort of like getting a pet wasp for your heart, keeping it in there. For some reason, it feels good at the start. But it does us more damage and hurts us more, oftentimes than the person that wounded us in the first place. So, at a time in world history where it's so easy to feel helpless, Jesus is going to say two things at the same time. If you have faith of the size of a mustard seed, faith not in the sense of belief, but in solidarity with human beings, trusting yourself, trusting other people, trusting life, you change the world in ways you can never know. We had as I mentioned earlier, the rally at the Capitol where the young people challenged us to do a better job. And the travesty of our time is, it's almost like the adults have fallen asleep in the back seat, and we're in the kiddie seats, and the children are having to crawl over the front seat to take the wheel. Greta Thunberg, is that how you say it? She was the start of that, and it's all over the world right now. But I saw a picture this week of her sitting at the Swedish Parliament by herself with a sign propped up. That's what Jesus is talking about. Her little mustard seed, when she was able to share that with other people. See, she wasn't just trusting God. She wasn't just trusting her cause. She was trusting humankind. She was trusting you and me. That if she did the right thing, maybe we would. She went before lawmakers, and again, I'm very nonpartisan, but it was a Republican. Again. And I swear, if you're a Republican, when they stop bashing everybody, I'm fine, right? But I feel like a guilty bystander if I don't say that a lot. But he was saying, well, you know, America's doing so much for the environment. And the types of things that could shut her heart down. And we're doing so much for the environment, but all these other countries aren't. So we shouldn't do this until everybody else does. Right? You hear that a lot. This little girl, she's a teenager now, but she laughed compassionately, didn't lose contact with him, and said, you know, it's interesting, I'm from Sweden, a small country, and that's the excuse they use not to do the right thing. That the United States doesn't do the right thing. Now that's a compassionate, loving, plopping it into your own backyard, right? Jesus is saying you're not being making nice, but you're also not attacking and being cruel. And that prophetic compassion that calls it like it is, that doesn't excuse it, that confronts it, however that needs to happen, that changes the world. It moves mountains. Sometimes one pebble at a time. But for that to happen in a church, the church has to stop being an institution and start being a movement. Based on this call to the whole world. Not to just meditate ourselves, but to save the world, to change it. Again, not from Satan, not from hell, but from hate and injustice and being less than we are. And Jesus is saying today the starting place that we so often forget is forgiveness. And that simply means letting go of the pain, letting go of the bitterness, letting go of the sense of superiority. Because we can't save the world when we don't respect the people in the world. I invite you now to your own reflection on these words.